video, we are going to talk about percentages, which are ubiquitous in business. Percentages are used all the time. For some examples, percentages are used to track changes in sales and expenses. They're used to calculate discounts and interest. Percentages are used to monitor revenue flows and to rate investments. You will be using percentages in all of your classes, and your instructors are going to assume that you have facility with them. So whether you do or not, it's a good idea to refresh yourself, and that's what these lessons are for. Percentages are used for comparison. They characterize quantities as a part of a whole so that we can evaluate and compare differently sized things in a meaningful way. So for example, suppose you had two products, product A and product B. Product A is $1 and B is $4. They both undergo a price increase, product A going up to $1.25 and product B going up to $5. So in product A's case, that's a price increase of 25 cents, whereas product B, you've got a $1 increase. So in terms of dollars, product B definitely went up more, definitely. But those raw dollars don't capture the whole picture because the two products started out at different prices. In fact, percentages would show that a 25-cent increase on a dollar is the same or equivalent to a $1 increase on $4. Both are 25% increases over the original price. And in certain contexts, that matters. So if you're paying the money, the actual costs of the products matter. But if you're budgeting or if you're comparing two products or if you are looking at sales in two different regions that have different revenue streams, you could compare them on the basis of percentages. So this conversion from percentages to actual counts or frequencies and back happens all of the time in business because both ways of expressing these things are important in different contexts. The word per means for every, and cent means 100. So the word percent, putting them together, it tells the actual story. When you see that percentage symbol, you can think for every 100. For example, 29% means 29 for every 100. This is mathematical. This means 29% can be written as 29 divided by 100 because that is what 29 for every 100 translates to mathematically. If you put that into your calculator, or you look at it and you realize that dividing by 100 means you have to move that decimal on the 29 to the left, you get 0.29. So the first way, for example, 29% is used when people are communicating about percentages. So people might say 60% of the inventory sold in the first week, or payroll fell by 10% this month. In the math, though, the percentages are always treated as an amount out of 100. So 60% in communicating to humans becomes 60 out of 100 in math, which is 60 divided by 100 and equals 0.6. When you do calculations about 60%, you've got to be using 0.6. 10% is 10 out of 100, which is 10 divided by 100, which is 0.1. So when you're doing calculations about 10% of something, it's 0.1 you've got to be using, or 10 divided by 100. You could write it out that way and that would be totally fine. So let's take a look at some examples. Example 4.1 says, what is 29% of 74? Round the answer to the tenths place. So remember that 29% is actually, mathematically speaking, 29 divided by 100, which equals 0.29. To take a percentage of a total amount, all you have to do is multiply the percentage by the total amount. So you can follow this, to get the percentage of a total, multiply the percentage by the total amount. But if you multiply 29 by 74, you're going to get some crazy amount. You have to multiply 29% by 74, understanding that 29% is 29 divided by 100, which is 0.29. 0.29 is the percentage times the total amount, which is 74, and we get 21.46. We were asked to round this to the tenths place. Tenths place is the first place after the decimal, so looking at the second decimal place, that's a 6, which is 5 or greater, so the first decimal place has to be rounded up to a 5. The answer to this is going to be 21.5. So 21.5 is 29% of 74. Now turning to example 4.2, what is 60% of 74? It says round the answer to one decimal, which is the tenths place. So here we're just seeing that there's two different ways to say the same thing, which we talked about in our rounding unit. Now, before we actually calculate this, I'm just going to note that 60 is about double 29, right? So we just took 29% of 74. Now we're about to take 60% of 74. 60 is about double 29, so 60% ought to be about double 29% of 74. 29% was 21.5. 21.5 times 2 is 43, so like a little more than 43. Anyway, the exercise I just went through, I recommend when making calculations, because if you sort of think of what the answer should be before you do the calculation, you will save yourself a lot of errors when you get an answer that doesn't make any sense. So what is 60% of 74? Well, 60% is 60 out of 100, which equals 0.6. Using the percent of a total equaling a percentage times the total amount again, we're going to multiply 0.6 times 74, and we get 44.4. That comes out even to one decimal. So that is just the answer, 44.4. 44.4 is just a little more than 43, which is in line with the estimate we made before calculating this number. Taking a look at example 4.3, we're asked what is 40% of 74 rounded to the first decimal place? We're going to actually calculate this in two ways. Let's go ahead and use this formula that we have been using. So if we want the percentage of a total, we multiply the percentage by that total amount, understanding that 40% is 40 out of 100, which is 0.4. So on the one hand, we can say 0.4 times 74 equals 29.6, and we have the answer. What's another way we could do this? Another way we could do this is to look back at example 4.2. 60% of 74 was 44.4. 74 represents 100%, right? So if you had all 74 of whatever this is, you would have 100% of whatever it is. And we found out that 60% of 74 was 44.4. Well, just as 100% minus 60% equals 40%, 100% of 74 is 74, minus 60%, which we calculated out, was 44.4. Use your calculator to calculate that out. You get 29.6. So, two different ways we figured out that 40% of 74 was 29.6. Because the entire amount is 100%, and these percentages just add up the way they do, you don't have to go through the figuring out that 40% is 0.4 and multiplying it by 74. You can simply take that whole amount, 74, subtract off the 60% that you don't want, so subtract off the 44.4, leaving the remaining 40%, which is 29.6.